Ngā mihi o te ahi ahi, good afternoon. And we move on now in our topic of market equilibrium and changes. And now we're going to analyze the market using different terminology. Same changes, but we're going to apply new terminology to the analysis. And the main focus on equilibrium now is on why allocative efficiency is achieved at market equilibrium. So the concepts we're going to focus on are consumer surplus, producer surplus, and also this strange term deadweight loss. But you'll have to hold your breath for that. Firstly, we need to look at some other things. Now we're going to focus on a new term known as deadweight loss, and we'll come to that in a moment. And the focus is on when a market doesn't achieve independently its own equilibrium. In other words, the government does something to change the market equilibrium, we will see that producer and consumer surplus will not be maximized. And there is a loss of allocative efficiency. And this loss of allocative efficiency, this decrease in allocative efficiency, is called dead weight loss. A peculiar name, but the key word, of course, is loss. And it's measured by the decrease or loss of CS and PS not gained by other groups. In Section A, deadweight loss results whenever the government intervenes in the market for private goods. And as I said, we'll revisit this term private goods in Section B to find out more. Now, the government interventions are listed there: indirect tax, subsidies, minimum and maximum price control, tariffs and quotas. Well, in fact, we will only look at indirect tax and tariffs. The others have been removed, and so they're not studied. Of course, you can have a look at them if you want to, but the examination will only focus on indirect tax and tariffs. Now, whenever the government uses an indirect tax or tariff, there will be deadweight loss. So the government now is a source of inefficiency. Whenever it does anything in this part of the course, in Section A, there will be a loss of allocative efficiency, and this is called dead weight loss. So if you like, the government is bad. Bad in the sense that in Section A, it causes a decrease or loss of allocative efficiency. So let's remind ourselves what an indirect tax is. Remember, it's a tax on goods and services. Most common example is sales tax. Excise tax is an extra tax that is placed especially on cigarettes, alcohol, and gambling, I think, as well, and petrol, and will get revenue for the government. So it's always the beneficiary of any tax is the government. The government gets tax revenue. But the government also might want to discourage consumption of a good because producer costs will increase. Because remember, when the tax goes on, initially it is a cost to the producer. So the supply curve will shift up to the left and the price will increase. So what we'll do is apply our original analysis on how a sales tax affects the market, and then we'll introduce our new terms, consumer and producer surplus, and of course deadweight loss. So here, as we know, an increase in any indirect tax causes costs to rise. So the supply curve will shift to the left, remembering the supply curve is the marginal cost curve above shutdown point. Consumers will pay a higher price, and so quantity demanded will decrease to QT. So now we want to measure the amount of tax the government will collect. Now, firstly, remember PMQM are the original price and quantity at the original equilibrium before the tax. So whatever the amount of tax is, the supply curve will increase or move up by the amount of tax per unit. Consumers will pay a higher price, but producers effectively will receive a lower price, even though consumers pay PC, but producers won't receive PC, they'll actually receive PP after they've paid tax. So let's have a look. Once again, the per unit value of the tax is the vertical distance, as we can see. So PC minus PP times the quantity sold will give us the amount of tax the government will receive, the total amount. Now, as you can see here in this next diagram, the supply curve's already shifted up because of the tax. We can see the amount of tax revenue the government's going to get, PC minus PP times Q dash. But now we're going to apply a new analysis of consumer and producer surplus. Now we know that the yellow triangle there represents the consumer surplus before the tax at the original equilibrium. So the area below the triangle and above the price line, PM. Equally, the producer surplus is the blue triangle, the area below the price and above the supply curve. Now, what happens when the tax is placed on the good? Well, we know that the producers effectively get a lower price, even though they are paid by consumers PC, but when the government takes the amount of tax, PC minus PP, effectively producer revenue is equal to PP times Q dash. For the consumer was paying PM, but is now paying PC, a higher price. So the new consumer surplus is represented by that triangle there, the blue one. So if we look at how much is lost, we can see that area there, including the triangle, represents, and the yellow area represents the loss or decrease in consumer surplus. Equally, we can see the loss of producer surplus is represented by a similar area in blue. Now, when we compare the gain to the loss, we can see there is a net loss. In other words, when we add the values of, or the decrease in consumer surplus and producer surplus, we can see that it's greater than the gain in tax revenue to the government. So we can see now another triangle to the right of the rectangle. This triangle here represents the decrease in CS and the decrease in PS that is lost. No other groups receive this. So it represents this loss of efficiency, this allocated efficiency. Now, to summarize using the terminology that we've been using, CSPS and deadweight loss. Now, the tax effectively means the price goes up to the consumer. So the consumer surplus will decrease because they're paying higher prices. They're worse off. But equally, the producer's worse off because the effective price he actually gets is less than what he was getting before the tax. So there's a loss of consumer surplus and producer surplus. Now, why does deadweight loss occur? Because the simpler answer, and it usually works fairly well in examinations, is the total loss is greater than the total gain. Now, who loses? Consumers lose, producers lose. So you total their loss, the loss represented below, and you can see visually that the total loss in CS and PS is greater than the total gain represented by the black rectangle, which is, of course, the tax revenue the government gets. So the area outside of the rectangle, the part of CS and PS that is lost, is not transferred to any other party. So we say that represents the loss of allocative efficiency, the dead weight loss. So have a go at this exercise and see how you go. So identify each of the areas represented by the numbers. And so it's going to be consumer surplus, producer surplus, decrease in producer surplus, etc. Okay, the last exercise in this unit is to look at this situation that occurs a lot in New Zealand, sporting fixtures, and you're told that you are to assume there are 105,000 seats available at a price, and the price of each seat is $200. So you draw a supply curve for rugby tickets. Then explain the shape of the curve that you've drawn. And then second question, if the government has concerns about spectator safety and asks the stadium managers to reduce the number of seats for sale from 105,000 to 90,000, but the tickets prices don't change, show the change that will take place in the market. Shade the new consumer surplus, calculate the shortage that results, and explain why shortages lead to queuing. Enjoy. Right, we know that there are only 105,000 seats available, so we have a fixed number of seats, so the supply curve is vertical or perfectly inelastic. Doesn't matter what the price does, the quantity supplied will not change. If the number is reduced because the government's worried about having too many people in the stadium, then the supply curve will shift by the amount the government want in the stadium. If the price doesn't change, well, of course, we're going to end up with a shortage. Note the consumer surplus has appeared on the left there and above, so it's still, price is still 200 in the area under the demand curve. The shortage, of course, is 15,000. So why do you get shortages? Because the price hasn't increased, and so queuing is the result of the price being too low relative to the quantity demanded.